Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining the session today. We are leading building capacity through cooperatives, childcare, and housing in Manitoba. So today, I would like to acknowledge that I am your moderator. My name is Candice Minott. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at Cooperatives First. And joining me on the panel, we have Dr. Susan Prentice. She is the Duff Roblin Professor of Government at the University of Manitoba. And we also have Nigel Mohammed, who is the Vice President, Community Financial Center at Assiniboine Credit Union. Now, before I begin, we wanted to give you some context to our discussion. So I have a brief presentation just to give you a overview of what we will discuss today and to provide some insights into what we found. So, there is an urgency as it relates to childcare and housing, and many of you may ask, why now? Especially in Manitoba, and we see this across rural communities in Canada, there are two most urgent needs: childcare and housing. We know that parents want to get back to work, they want to study, and of course, there's also a need for housing. Families want to thrive, and it's what makes rural communities strong. So, this is something that we recognize that the private market has not solved, and there has been a lot of policy initiatives to move this forward. Specifically, we know that Canada-wide there are long wait lists, especially as it relates to childcare. Uh, Licensed childcare is an issue that, as a federal government, Canada wanted to address. There are different challenges, and we'll delve deeper into this. But what we want to bring home, especially within the Manitoban context, is that um, there is a commitment to provide spaces for under sixes that the Manitoba government has not been able to realize. We also know that across the prairies, for example, in Saskatchewan, there's a similar issue. And right across Canada, childcare spaces that are for profit are really on the rise. And this, we will delve into that some more, has become a concern. Generally, we see where the federal government has pumped some dollars into this initiative. And luckily for Manitoba, the government has been proactive here and has signed on to the Canada wide Early Learning and Childcare Initiative on to 2031. So lots of good things happening, but still, groups need to build capacity to access this capital funding. When we move on to housing, there is some context there as well that in order to fill a gap within the Manitoban landscape, 260,000 homes are needed. Rent prices are escalating, and affordable housing is something that is a concern for families. We know that there are solutions out there, so putting forward the cooperative model as one that can address this concern, you may ask why cooperatives and what is a cooperative? Well, a cooperative is a collective of people coming together to create solutions. It's a very versatile model, and it creates an atmosphere where community service is put over individualized profits. These cooperatives can be used both for childcare and housing, and it gives the community a way in which to put their needs first. It's governed under one member, one vote, and as owners, there's a collective sense of responsibility. And really, it is an excellent model for communities looking to solve their own problems. For housing, there are various examples of successful housing co op solutions that can be adapted for rural communities. And we are putting forward in this panel that there is a way for us to explore this and to talk about it and to see how it is that we can work together. We recognize that a blended approach is required, talking about developing childcare centers and housing co-ops. They're significant in terms of financial expenditure. So there is a need for stakeholders to come together from the municipal level, from the provincial level, and also community members working together with financial institutions such as credit unions in order to get quality care. There are options available on both sides with the childcare and housing. However, we do believe that it is a collective solution that needs to come into play. So, how can groups access some of this funding? I'm going to invite Nigel Mohammed just to speak briefly on what's available from a financial institution point of view. Nigel?
Thank you, Candice. Just quickly show me where the button is here. This one right here? Okay. This one here? Okay. Okay, so thank you again, and for the organizers of this important next few days here. So just a quick introduction in terms of my role and my contribution over the next hour here is I work with the Assiniboine Credit Union. And one of the things that we're learning, I had an opportunity to sit into a couple of the sessions this morning, is for rural economic development really to be sustainable, the whole issue about access to capital has to be on the agenda. Quite often, the access to capital, the first thought is government, municipal, provincial, federal. But Candice talked about credit unions as another source of potential capital. And my role with the credit union over the years has been focusing on what we can do as a local financial cooperative to really offer creative, flexible, but community-based solutions to be able to access capital. So the Assiniboine Credit Union, for those of you who are from Manitoba, will be familiar with Westoba Credit Union. ACU, Assiniboine Credit Union, recently merged with the Westoba Credit Union. We also merged with the Case Financial Group, which is Case Populaire. So what we're seeing across the country is a contraction, is a consolidation of the sector. So we have credit unions that are coming together to be able to have greater scale and greater capacity to provide services across, in this case, across the province. So ACU is a merger between the Case and Westoba. And the key that, Candice alluded to, it's a local solution. It's local in that it's owned by members and it's governed by members, and it makes decisions for the interest of its members. Now, as a credit union, it's a financial cooperative, so it's got to be sustainable. It's got to be profitable. But the idea that profit is somehow a negative connotation, I think, is one of the myths that those of you who are within a credit union, a member of a credit union, would understand that you need to be profitable in order to fulfill the requirements of that financial cooperative. What I'd like to leave you with is this whole idea about accessing debt. So I heard this morning in one of the sessions that a lot of the work that's being done in rural Canada are done by not-for-profits. It's not led by private sector. In some cases, it's not even led by government. It's led by not-for-profit organizations. And when we think about some of the barriers that not-for-profits face, one of those barriers would be access to capital. So what we have done over the years, certainly at the Assiniboine Credit Union, is to think about how do we measure risk? How do we assess risk of a not-for-profit looking to access debt, not a grant, but to access debt in a way that is responsible and sustainable to fulfill and expand its social mission. So what you see before you here is a slide that lists the academic view of it as the 5 C's of credit. But you will see here there are 5 different criteria that any financial institution would look to assess the risk of a borrower, whether it's a for-profit, whether it's an individual, you going for your mortgage, or whether it's a not-for-profit. What we have done, what we have learned over the years is that if we're going to use these metrics to be able to assess risk, we have to be able to acknowledge there's going to be a difference in how we measure each one of these things. So for example, if we take this whole idea about capacity, C, which is really about affordability. What is the capacity of that organization, that not-for-profit, to be able to sustain that debt? Well, the usual metrics that is used for financing does not work for a not-for-profit organization. A not-for-profit, in the name of itself, is quite often operating at a break-even. So a not-for-profit would not meet the usual credit criteria to access debt. So then a lender like a credit union like ours needs to rethink how we assess risk. We don't want to provide debt to an organization that can't afford it, but we have to rethink how we assess risk, in this case, for the ability to repay. So we've been able to come up with models and ideas and approaches to work with not-for-profit organizations to ensure that the debt that they're taking on is in fact affordable. Collateral is another C. One of the barriers that many nonprofits have in accessing capital is the fact that they have no assets, or they have little assets on their balance sheet, meaning that they don't have any collateral that they can pledge to be able to take on debt. Well, there are programs and partnerships that are available that we can access to be able to take the place of traditional collateral, whether it's loan guarantees, whether it's third-party guarantors that's coming to us. We can bridge that gap for collateral to make sure that these nonprofit organizations have the ability to access debt. So all that to say, the theme that I hear certainly this morning is around collaboration, is around partnership. And I think credit unions is one of those partners that I think, particularly for not-for-profit organizations looking to build daycares, looking to build affordable housing, is one of the stakeholders, is one of the partners that needs to be around the table, as opposed to simply looking to government or philanthropy, which is becoming more and more scarce, certainly in today's economy. So we'll have more conversations about some of the specifics around this, but I wanted just to leave this image in your head and have you think about, for a nonprofit wanting to access debt for childcare or for affordable housing or for any other social purpose for that matter, it's being able to understand what the lender is looking for on these 5 C's, and then how do you position your not-for-profit organization in a way to be able to be successful when you make that ask. So looking forward to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much, Nigel. And just to close out, before we go into our panel discussion, you may be asking at this point, how do we get support for rural communities? And there is support out there. As mentioned before, there are grants available for rural communities to access. However, for volunteer groups, this is a tall ask. There are organizations to support. My organization, Co-operatives First, we have been helping cooperatives across Western Canada since 2016. We help groups to start all types of cooperatives, including childcare and housing co-ops. But our support is free of cost due to our generous funder, Federated Cooperatives Limited, and the Cooperative Retailing System. And we provide groups with that support to access grant funding. We do business coaching, and we also help in terms of lowering some of those barriers. We do work along with groups who want to access funding from financial institutions like credit unions. And what we found as well is that this blended approach that Nigel referred to is required for a lot of the funding models. They want to see that blended stakeholder involvement with community groups, their municipality, provincial sources, and other types of funding. I do have a QR code here, so if it is that you want more details about the work that we do, you can go to these dedicated pages, and then I'll move over to our panel discussion with Susan and Nigel. So thank you for your listening ears. We'll just continue on this side. Okay, so starting this discussion, I'm going to lead off with Susan. And Susan, from your years of academic research, there are some insights that you can give to our group here about affordable quality childcare. In terms of 2025, providing some context, we'd like to get an understanding of some of the challenges across Canada and how you see, especially rural and Indigenous communities, from your perspective. How did we arrive at this point?
Okay, buckle up, it's a long story. But the punchline goes, we've mainly thought of childcare as being a private family responsibility, despite decades and decades of advocacy work. And then we had a pandemic, and all of a sudden it became clear to people who kind of ignored it before that everybody relies on somebody who relies on childcare. Maybe you're not a parent yourself, but your doctor's not going to work if she doesn't have childcare, right? And there won't be goods on the shelf if people can't stock it. And so the importance of childcare all of a sudden drops. And we got a federal government for the first time since World War II that put big money into childcare, $30 billion over a 5-year program, and here we are. So now we have $10 a day childcare in most of Canada. Parents who used to pay through the nose are now finding lower costs. And so the next big challenge is, how do we make enough spaces? If you looked at the news in Winnipeg earlier this month, you would have seen that the average parent in Winnipeg is going to wait 17 months to get a childcare spot. It's not very different in Saskatchewan or Alberta. In Quebec, it's a different story, but most parents don't have enough access. Why is this? Most of the childcare in Canada is provided by not-for-profits, which means that parent volunteers got together, raised the funds, wrote the bylaws, incorporated it, and run things themselves. There's a lot of work for community groups to do. So right now, if you want to start a childcare center in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, use about $50,000 per space as your capital cost. So if you want to have a 50-space center, you're going to raise $2.5 million of capital to open up your program. There may be some funding you can get from your province, maybe not. Mostly your community group is going to have to come up with the rest of the money. How will you do it? There will be operating funds once you're open, but there's a huge inertia hurdle to get started, and that's where co-ops first will come in, right? A cooperative model is one way to provide the coaching and support, to bring stakeholders together, the kind of cooperative work we've been doing through this interesting project, which has now started, how many centers, Candice?
So far, we're at 19.
19 centers.
At varying levels.
Yeah, 19 centers on the way or already open. We don't just rely on parents. We don't just ask parents to do it. We come together to a community and we say, who are the leaders? Maybe the school board. Maybe there are faith communities. Maybe there are partners with Indigenous governments. Maybe there's community centers. But we're trying to bring in solid community resources so that it's not just parents of young children at the busiest part of their lives trying to start up a program. But once you have childcare in your community, you've created jobs, you see economic returns, you see local purchasing, you see potentially in many communities a way to mitigate rural depopulation. Young families can afford to live and stay and keep things going. You can bring professionals to your communities. And very interesting, why we're here together, is the federal government now is trying to bring childcare and housing even closer together, right? You can find ways to build housing and childcare together so that you're providing housing for families that's affordable. You're potentially providing housing for the early childhood educators who will work in the childcare. You can get synergies through these programs. So we're very excited to talk to you about these possibilities. That's how we got here.
Thanks, Susan. And the project Susan is referring to, we worked on a childcare project through some funding from Prairies Economic Development Canada. And we were able to work with groups across Western Canada. We started with a small group in Maple Creek, Saskatchewan, a population of about 2,500 persons. However, what was unique about this group is that they were able to get parent support, community support, also the municipality donated land, the rural municipality was involved, and also the Nicolet First Nation. And with this blended stakeholder group, they were able to access provincial funding. So for us, it created a model that we've tried to replicate across the prairies, and we've really had a lot of success. Here in Brandon, we're working with a couple of groups, and it has really been, phenomenal in terms of how rural communities themselves are looking at addressing their needs. So I'm going to bring in Nigel at this point. Nigel, in terms of rural and indigenous communities, as we see challenges that they continue to face, from a financial institution's perspective, why should credit unions like ACU be engaged in these issues now?
Thanks, Candice. When I listen to all of you and I hear some of the challenges that each of you are trying to grapple with in terms of rural economic development and all the barriers around that, I think about credit unions and why credit unions even began in the first place. Financial cooperatives, credit unions, were formed to address a need in the community that was not being met. And I know certainly ACU, Candice, we started back in 1943 as a cooperative among 12 people who were electric car workers. They couldn't access financing. They couldn't access loans at that time. The first loan was $100 for a medical. This is before our universal health, right? So this was for a medical bill that they couldn't access any kind of debt to pay a medical bill. So I start to answer your question by saying, each of you are grappling with your respective areas of expertise to find solutions that's affecting rural communities across this country and in your respective countries. I think about credit unions and the fact that we were established as a cooperative for that purpose, is to address gaps. So when I think about rural communities, particularly indigenous and remote communities, the question is, how can a credit union play a role in getting rid of some of those barriers? And the answer to that is recognizing what those barriers are to begin with. So in rural Manitoba, certainly, whether it's childcare, whether it's housing, whether it's youth at risk, whether it's food security, any not-for-profit that is looking to expand and scale the work that they're doing for greater impact, they need dollars. They need money. And those dollars are becoming harder and harder to access. So one of the solutions is for those traditional players like a financial institution to do things, be willing to do things differently. Still be responsible in the fiduciary, need that we need to ensure that our members' deposits are safe. But much like what many of you are doing of experimenting and innovating and trying new things with new partners around the table, that's what ACU is doing as well. With indigenous communities, with not-for-profits, with municipalities, with groups like Cooperatives First, with educational institutions like U of M, to understand what the barriers are, what the challenges are, and then how can a financial institution bring its resources, its expertise, its voice. We have over 200,000 members, almost 220,000 members in this province. How can we bring even our voice to an issue to make a difference? So it's important for our credit union, Candice, to be part of this conversation at this conference with Cooperatives First, certainly with the work that Susan is doing, to ask ourselves, how do we respond? How do we rethink risk? How do we deploy our resources? How do we share our expertise in a way to be part of the broader solution? And it's very different. The last comment is recognizing there are very different challenges rural communities and northern communities and indigenous populations have that urban center nonprofits or enterprises have, right? So we're also learning that to find out how do we understand what those barriers are and then respond in a way that is going to be relevant to the mutual outcome.
Okay. Thanks, Nigel. So I want to draw it back now to some of the policy issues. So Susan, I'm going to draw you in for this one. We know that federal initiatives like the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Agreement and also the Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation supports have been important developments. Now, how are these policy tools intersecting with local communities, especially as it relates to the cooperative models for housing and childcare?
Well, earlier this month, you might have seen that the government of Canada announced a program called Build Canada Homes. Is that what you said? $1.8 billion going to try to support building homes, making more affordability, looking for partners, and hoping to also meet other social goals, including childcare targets. So we're in a moment right now where there's a very receptive political climate. And as I've mentioned, when a childcare is up and running, in most provinces in Canada, parents will pay $10 a day, and the remainder will be covered by public funding. But if the centers don't get started, they're not there to be used. They're not there to receive the funding. And so this is the piece of the pipeline, which is not just a leak, it's a break. So we're looking for how to connect these dots up. This is where trying to leverage these models, right? Leverage the strength of community partners like understanding co-ops, understanding financial institutions, bringing stakeholders together. And let me say that there's a risk if we don't get it right. Because if we can't figure out how to provide these publicly or through not-for-profit co-ops, there's a real risk that a free enterprise market's gonna swoop in and try to do these things through privatized models. I just want to spend a minute to say how risky this is. Despite the promise of the Canada-wide agreements that said that the expansion was mostly supposed to be not-for-profit and public, you might have seen a slide zip by that said something like 6 out of 10 new spaces has been for-profit. So there's for-profit and for-profit. Let me tell you why for-profit in the case of childcare is a problem. It means you've got a private owner or potentially a private equity business that's going to make business decisions about services that families and children need. It means that they can open and shut where they want and when they want, but a community has no control. And at the end of the day, when a for-profit childcare closes down, it takes assets that were built through taxpayer and parent dollars, and it will own them privately. Right? So you pay off a mortgage, you own the property, you sell the business, you got a private profit in your pocket. That is bad stewardship of public dollars. And worse, everything that we know about the regulatory environment where there's a significant share of for-profit players is they want to put downward pressure on quality. You know, do you really need a 2-year early childhood education degree, or is 1 year enough? Do you really need that much outdoor play space for children, or is like a smaller space enough? Right? Do you really need to have 1 worker for every 4 babies, or could they take care of 6? Everything we know is that they try to change the regulatory environment. And the quality is worse. When it comes to caring for vulnerable people, we know the profit motive is deadly. And if you don't remember what we learned during COVID about the death rates in homes for senior citizens, let me remind you, right? The death rates for vulnerable older people was more than double in for-profit elder care homes than it was in not-for-profits and public ones. So I'm motivated by 2 reasons: the local democracy that co-ops can promote, and my very reasonable fear that if we don't get it right, there will be private enterprisers coming in to try to make money off of families and children. So that's the moment I think we're in right now, and I think we should get it right.
You know, Susan, that's providing some great context. And I think it's a good point to bring in Nigel, because from a financial institution perspective, what is the appetite to take on risks associated with non-profit cooperatives as opposed to for-profit ventures? You know, that's I think a key element, Nigel, that we need to address.
Yeah, no, that's an important point. You know, we're here talking about 2 specific sectors: childcare and housing. But there's a broader, you know, issue here that Susan just spoke about in terms of private versus not-for-profit or collectively owned. Yeah. Research would show,
Does show.
certainly, that a cooperative business or a cooperative enterprise is twice as, in terms of length of time in operations, twice as successful as a for-profit private enterprise. So what I mean by that is, if I wanted to open up my barber shop and I start my business, stats would show in 2 to 3 years that business fails. If I, on the other hand, join with Susan and Candice and we have a cooperative barbershop, stats show that that business survives twice as long, 5 to 10 years in business, than a sole proprietor or a for-profit business. So what Susan is saying is critically important in terms of who owns the asset, the vulnerability of price changes, whether it's housing from a private landlord or a privately run daycare. But it's also about sustainability. So if I am in a rural community and I'm thinking, should I move to this community or that community? And I have a young family and my budget is limited in terms of housing, but I know this community has co-op housing that's available. It also has a co-op daycare that's available. That would be a factor for me and my family in terms of what community would I choose. So there's some real evidence-based reasons why cooperatives, whether childcare, whether housing, whether it's business, makes sense. The technical work that cooperatives first provides in terms of the bylaws and understanding a co-op, and in the case of the childcare initiative, getting your proposal ready for financing, that's invaluable. But it's going to help you succeed that much greater than if you try to do it on your own. So sometimes communities thinking, boy, this co-op thing it's a maze. It's worse than trying to get CMHC financing, having to navigate all this stuff. But with a partner like Cooperatives First, you're halfway there. They have all the expertise and technical, let's call it templates and approach to make you succeed. So remind me the question again. I think I went off on a rant there.
Yeah, so just in terms of the financial institution,
The risk.
appetite for risk.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the with the whole risk issue, I said earlier, FIs, financial institutions, need to be willing to want to rethink how they assess risk. So what we do is we bring other partners to the table. So I mentioned, for example, one of the biggest barriers that from a risk standpoint in financing is you don't have collateral. The organization doesn't have security to pledge. Well, we have partners both from the federal government, but also community loan fund, in some cases government, to be able to guarantee to prevent or to satisfy rather that collateral issue, right? We also have the ability as a financial institution to decide whether we want to educate or tell the borrower, here's a list of things you do, go get it and come back to me when you're ready. Recognizing that a lot of nonprofits that are just starting or those established, they don't have the expertise sometimes to start a new daycare or to build a new housing. So we have to be intentional about being patient and providing education and walking alongside the boards and management much longer than that runway normally takes for traditional financing. So part of the risk isn't just the metrics of collateral and capacity and equity, but it's also this patient approach of working with and educating and advising these members. We have a responsibility to ensure that they're set up to be successful.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. And I think it's really a good point to talk about the timely access to this funding. For Western Canada, for example, with the Early Learning Childcare Agreement, Alberta and Saskatchewan have not signed on. Manitoba has. And Susan, I just wanted to leave, this space for you to just share with us how critical it is for groups to access this funding now. So based on your research, what challenges and opportunities do you see with how funding flows to grassroots projects for co-op childcare and housing, and what may make them more effective in the future?
Well, let me answer this question by asking you to think about Nelson, BC. Small town, great skiing. Anybody knows Nelson? Lovely place. Didn't have a childcare center And so the municipality got together with local partners, and you can take a look at it. It's got some great news coverage. In Nelson, BC, they set up a multi-purpose organization, provides simultaneously childcare services to the town and housing. It's an integrated housing childcare development. Municipality played a big role in it. It's a whole other topic for a whole other session. But now in Nelson, BC, there's affordable housing for early childhood educators whose wages are still low. And they live and work in a place, right, providing care for the town, providing care for children and for workers. And the mayor of Nelson has talked about the extraordinary benefits this has meant for Nelson, right? It's a more desirable place to be. It's providing better support for the families and children in Nelson, makes Nelson a better place to relocate. There are local multipliers, new jobs in Nelson, new purchasing and new buying. And it's an example of a small little place where you might not think that daycare is so needed. Sometimes you think of it as a city issue. But any place you find children and families, you need childcare and you need housing. And these are some of the success stories that I think we need to share. There will soon be 19 stories we can tell across the prairies about ways in which cooperative childcare is setting up. And this brings quality of life as well as really good ROI to communities where this gets established. What we need to do is connect the dots so that the services get established so that we can start reaping the benefits. And so that's where this is a big pitch to think about the establishment of co-op childcare and the partners that make it possible.
Okay, well, we just want to thank you all for listening in. We hope you would have learned something. If you do need more information, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can also pass you on to Nigel and Susan. Thank you both so much for being on our panel today. Have a great day, everybody.